Well, welcome to our workshop, Why Housing is Central to Solving Homelessness. My name is Esmeralda Virelas. Today you are going to be hearing from a few of our Destination Home team members, David Lowe, Chelsea Muller, and Kathy Pam. Again, thank you for joining us today. And we want to go over a few housekeeping reminders. Remember that there's a unmute button on your screen that you're remember to keep muted unless you want to share something with the rest of us. If you can and you're in a place where that allows for you to turn on your video, that could be great for us to share the space together. And also remember that if you have any questions, we have the chat that you are welcome to plug in any questions that you have, comments. You can send us a message directly to myself, Esmeralda, or Kathy, and we're gonna make sure we are addressing those. A little bit about what we're going to do today in Destination Home. Today, we will be sharing some data that you may have already seen before. And this data shows the current state of homelessness and a little bit of the insight into a growing body of evidence that really shows a crucial role that housing plays in solving homelessness. This growing body of evidence also shows a crucial correlation of housing and homelessness, and how this information is also key as we continue to work on solutions that actually work. And as you know, we are Destination Home, and we are helping to end homelessness through the funding of impactful strategies, through public policy, advocacy, community engagement, and research. And also by being the backbone organization for a collective impact model, where we bring partners together to actually set a common agenda, consistently measure results, develop mutually reinforcing activities, and to ensure an open and continuous engagement with our community. And before we continue, Kathy's going to share some activities to get us all here and present. We know that solving homelessness is top of mind for everyone, and especially if you're here today, right? So I want to invite you to envision what is possible. And collectively just spend a little bit of time reflecting on what does a community where you fully belong feel like, feels like, or looks like. There's a link on the chat that Kathy shared with us. So if you click on the link, you will have an opportunity to share words that describe what that community looks like for you and what that community feels like. And the possibilities really of what we can accomplish when we come together as a community. As you click submit, we should be able to see Kathy's screen, where all of those are populated. So give us a quick second. So please click on the link and we should be able to see. There you go. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you to those of you that are sharing with us. Diverse, friendly, kind, safe, inclusive, welcoming. Other things I'm seeing: inclusive again, warmth, it's mixed, healthy, happy, there's valued. Thank you. Thank you to those of you that took the time to share that with us. It's going to take all of us, really, all of us coming together to make this vision a reality, a community that is safe and inclusive and healthy and happy and friendly, and all of those things that we are collectively imagining and envisioning, really. And to make this vision a reality, and the first step for that is acknowledging where we are now. And for that, I want to invite Chelsea to share with us.
Thank you, Esmeralda, and thank you, everyone who's here today to learn more about this incredibly important topic and the role that we all play. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we know about the current state of homelessness in Santa Clara County. The point in time count provides a snapshot of how many people are experiencing homelessness, and it can also show us trends over time. That's what you're looking at here is trends since 2007. Here locally, over recent years, rates have remained relatively flat, around 10,000 people experiencing homelessness. It's too many, of course, but despite the challenges of recent years that have put more people at risk, increasing housing costs, the pandemic shutdown and its disruptions, for example, it's remained relatively flat despite those forces that are definitely putting more people at risk. As you'll see later on in the presentation, this is a testament to the solutions that are currently underway. It's also evidence of the persistent housing challenges that we face here locally. We go to the next slide. This shows us a few other things that we know about those experiencing homelessness in our community. We know that the vast majority of people who are experiencing homelessness have been residents of our community, and they want to find housing. There are also several reasons that people cite for causing their experiences of homelessness. In the latest count, for example, 11% of people said alcohol and drug use were contributing factors. But the top reason reported is a lost job. We also know, you're not seeing it here, but it's an important detail to mention, that we know that minorities are experiencing homelessness in disproportionate rates in our community and across the country. So we embark on creating a community that is safe and healthy and inclusive, and the words that we just saw in that beautiful word cloud. You know, it's important to understand the root reasons that people are being pushed into homelessness. Our community solutions will only be effective if they're actually addressing the underlying causes that are pushing people into homelessness and are causing the high rates of homelessness that we're seeing today. We're going to dive deeper into this in our presentation. We have a brief video that we wanted to show you first to help explain.
Homelessness is a top concern for all of us. With a shared understanding of what is pushing people into homelessness, we can solve this crisis. Over the past few decades, we've seen housing costs rise to astronomical levels, pushing rent far out of reach. The evidence is clear. In communities across the country, when rents go up, experiences of homelessness go up. Rates of homelessness vary across the U.S., but it is the lack of housing options and sky-high rents that the communities seeing the highest rates have in common. But what about the many other factors we hear commonly cited as the root causes of our homelessness crisis? In their recent book, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, researchers show that there is no correlation between rates of substance abuse, mental illness, or even poverty, and rates of homelessness in a community. That's why solving this crisis requires us to focus on expanding housing options in our community. And there is a growing body of evidence showing that investing in housing programs can end homelessness. Here in Silicon Valley, almost all people connected to permanent supportive housing are remaining stably housed. And by providing rapid cash assistance to those at risk, we're preventing thousands of experiences of homelessness before they begin. And we have proof that it is more cost-effective to build housing and fund prevention programs than just treat the symptoms of homelessness with public services. Housing-based programs are ending and preventing homelessness for thousands of our residents. but we're not seeing the impact on our streets because we are not scaling these strategies to meet the depth of the crisis. In our society, homelessness has been a policy choice, which means we have the power to course correct. Let's reject hopelessness and work together to expand effective housing-based solutions to create a brighter future where everyone has a place to call home. Homelessness.
So now to dig into some of the facts and details that was highlighted in that video, I'm going to toss it to my colleague, David Lowe.
Thanks, Chelsea, and great to see so many people joining us today. Thanks for taking the time to dig into these issues a little bit. Before we get going, I just want to encourage you, if you have questions as we go, because we're going to get into some pretty wonky details, please put it in the chat. We'll come back to questions as we go, and then we're definitely going to save some time at the end for some actual discussion, dialogue that can help us really dig into these issues some more. So, to where we start, we're going to dig into some stuff you already saw in the video, some other data, other perspectives we go, but I always think it's important to start with this question. Why is there so much homelessness in our community? And I put this way in specifically because I think when we think of what this is related to causes, we can think of a lot of different things. Chelsea referred to them a little bit too. There's all sorts of individual reasons why a person, Jim, Joe, whoever, falls into homelessness. And we need to know that, and we need to understand it. It's important. But if you look at the data, and Chelsea talked about it a little bit, there's not any one reason a person falls into homelessness. They're falling in for any myriad of reasons. But when we start asking why is there so much homelessness here in Santa Clara County and elsewhere, what we see is, and the research shows us, that there are big structural forces causing homelessness. And there are many, and they're interrelated. I put 4 on the screen here that a lot of researchers think are predominantly the major causes, but they're not all equal. They all play a role in it, but there's this growing body of research we're going to talk about today that points to that first bucket. It's high rents and of a lack of affordable housing that is truly driving our crisis. So, we could talk forever about how unaffordable it is for those of us who live in this community. We're not going to spend a lot of time because we know the rents are high. There's not nearly enough affordable options. But just one kind of orienting slide here is how rent burdened so many of our residents are. And severely rent burdened is a standard where you spend more than half of your income on utility and rents. And it means there's nothing left for pretty much anything else. And there are tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of people in our community who are severely rent burdened. And you can see it's our lowest income folks, what we call ELI, extremely low income households, people making the least amount of money, who are severely rent burdened. And this is just one fact we like to ground ourselves in about how bad our housing affordability crisis is. So we go on that for days, but what we really want to talk about is that research that shows that this is the biggest primary reason we have homelessness. So on the screen here, you see a chart that was also come up in the video. It's a little complicated, so I just want to take a minute to throw into it. But this is from the USGAO, so a federal government report. And they looked at communities across the country, and they said, well, we want to understand how places with high or low levels of homelessness, how they compare with rents. So if you look at the chart, the darker the green is, the higher the average rent is in a community. And if you look at the size of the circles, they say how much homelessness the community has. And shocker here, you can hear this over and over today, the communities where you see the highest rents are also where you see the highest levels of homelessness. You see us, and actually many communities, because it includes us, Oakland, San Francisco, on the West Coast there, Honolulu, in the Northeast, a lot of these places. But it's not just all big cities. Look at some of these other big cities where you see lower rents and lower amounts of homelessness. Chicago, Houston, I'm guessing the second Texas one is Dallas. So it really kind of is one of this first piece of evidence we've seen that you can find this correlation between rent and homelessness. This is by far not the only slide, not the only research. There's a growing body of evidence of some of this. Zillow research, right? They put a lot of research into look at the real estate market, and they found a similar thing. They looked at it a little bit differently. They didn't just look at absolute rent levels. They looked at what the average person in that community spends on rent. And they said that they looked at communities where the average person spends more than a third, 30%, so about a third of their income on rent or more, we see homelessness rise. So it's not just about the absolute rent, it's how it has to do with income too. But again, what's the takeaway? These high housing costs are correlated with homelessness. The third study I'm going to share with you today, and again, we'll have links to this later, and you can find this when we show you the resources so you can dig into this more. But the Pew Research Center, a very credible nonpartisan organization. This is actually pretty recent research they put out. And what they showed is that it's not just a static issue. It's not just a matter of, right, if you have high rents, you're going to have high homelessness forever. That is one of the things. But they wanted to look to see what happens when rents go as they change, what happens with homelessness. So the chart on the left looks at a number of communities and what has rent done over the past 5 years. And we do have to acknowledge here that in most normal circumstances, rents are going to go up either way, right? We have inflation, other costs of living, rents are probably going to go up. But we see a huge difference in how much rents are going up in different communities. The ones on the top are seeing huge rent increases over 5 years, whereas the ones on the bottom are much more moderate. And if you compare that on the right, which was our levels of homelessness, you see that same correlation. You see where there's more bigger rent increases, a skyrocketing change in homelessness, and where there are lower rent increases, this is what it was interesting to me. It's not that we see lower amounts of homelessness. We actually saw homelessness go down. So just another piece of evidence that shows that there is this really strong correlation and this causal factor in when you look at this data that shows that what's happening in our housing market is affecting our levels of homelessness. So the last slide was something else you saw in the video. And this is what I thought was one of the more insightful pieces of research. If you, and actually we have a prize for you. We're gonna do a raffle at the end for a copy of this book. I actually had a chance to meet Greg Colburn, but it's called Homelessness is a Housing Problem. And it was a book written by 2 researchers in the University of Washington. And they were looking at this similar issue, but much more broadly. They didn't just look at housing costs and homelessness in the community. They said, we want to look at all the other reasons we commonly hear for why we have so much homelessness in our community. And you can see this on the left. And not a surprise, but we'll say it out loud. They went one by one for them and looked at what are all these communities, not what levels of homelessness, but what are these other things? What are the rates of poverty? What's their weather look like? What are mental illness rates? What are substance abuse rates? And other than housing costs, like everyone else, they found that correlation. One by one, they showed that there's not a correlation with these other factors in a community, which again just goes to show that it's our housing costs that are really driving our homelessness crisis. But I do want to pause the slide for 1 minute to make something very clear, because I think this is where there's important nuances here. I don't want anyone to leave here today to say that David said or Destiny Trump said that there's not some kind of connection between some of these issues, and particularly mental illness and substance abuse. Because yes, we know there are people experiencing homelessness who are suffering from these issues, just like there are people in our community who are housed who are suffering from these issues. And for some of them, right, we have to acknowledge sometimes this is the result of being on the streets. You're on the streets, you're making a lot of tough choices and just trying to cope through the day. But also, you heard it from Chelsea before, some people report that, yeah, it was one of these issues that contributed to their homelessness. But what this study does show also is that it's not the reason why we have such high levels of homelessness in our community. Every individual person's circumstances change. But if those were the real driving reasons we have a lot of homelessness, we would see huge rates of homelessness in other parts of the country, parts of the deep south that are dealing with an opioid crisis, other communities, rural communities in general, but we don't see it. We see homelessness in these areas generally of affluence, which is ironic as well, but that have high housing costs. And so that's an important message that we hope people will take away and start thinking a little bit more, because understanding the root of the crisis is really how it's going to help us find solutions. So I'm going to take a pause right there because I need a breath, but definitely remind people again, if you have questions, what you have, please put them in the chat. We'll address them as we go, but also we'll have a time at the end for more dialogue. So just really quickly while I'm doing that, Kathy, were there any questions that came up in the chat we should address?
And so far, I think you're good.
Okay, pop them in there and again, we'll have more time for dialogue. So we spent a few minutes digging in, and again, we're going to share all this information because for those of you who really want to go diver, there's a body of evidence that shows that really our homelessness crisis is a result of our housing affordability crisis. But just as important is that there's a bunch of evidence that shows that when we start addressing this need for more affordable housing options, we are actually ending homelessness. And so when we think about what the solution to homelessness is, there's a lot of ways we can address our affordability crisis. But one of the most impactful, particularly for a community like ours, where we just have a huge supply problem, is by building more affordable housing. And we've done that a lot of ways, fortunately, and not just fortunately, but through the leadership of many folks, really starting to invest in trying to tackle this decades-long problem in the past few years. And we've seen communities and organizations across the region really start investing in affordable housing. But one in particular I want to call out, and you see reflected here, was the Measure A housing bond. It's a countywide housing bond that put almost $1 billion in affordable housing that the voters approved in 2016. And since then, we have helped, we as a community have allocated a lot of those funds into 50 new affordable housing developments that will have more than 5,000 affordable homes in our community. Yes, it takes some time to build that housing, but look at this. About a third of those units are already online and serving folks who need an affordable home, with many more coming online in the years ahead. We've been fortunate because of partnerships. We're building this type of housing throughout the community. And what's really important, why we at Destination Home, and maybe you'll love Measure A, is it serves a variety of people. You know, a lot of people don't know exactly what affordable housing is, and that's another topic for the day. But it's the idea that you have a place within a rent you can afford. And we're building these developments to serve a variety of people. We're serving veterans, families, seniors, families being like, you know, units, right? Families with kids in it. People at all income levels, right? So people who are making maybe a little bit less than average, those extremely low income households, which is really important for ending homelessness. And some of these are actually reserved for people who are experiencing homelessness, to actually move them from homelessness into housing. So this is an important strategy for not only helping address homelessness right now, but starting to address that huge root cause that we know that has been growing over decades and that is driving our crisis today. So building affordable housing is really important. But just as important is the programs that we have invested here in our county, in our community, to help those who are experiencing a risk of homelessness access a safe and stable home. And you saw a version of the slide in the video, but there are actually many different housing programs and different interventions that are working. Too many that we talk about today. But we want to focus on 3 of them that are really key parts of our homelessness response in Santa Clara County, and which we are proud are going to work. And, you know, I'll talk briefly about them. Again, we're probably for another day, we can go deep into one of them. But the importance of it is that they work a little bit differently, but they all have 2 common components. They help people access an affordable home, a home that they can afford, that will fit within what their income is. And they combine wraparound services to provide other kinds of support. Because we know that people have many needs. So let's take care of that affordable and the need for affordable housing, but also make sure that they're in a position to thrive. And that's particularly true for people who are coming from on the streets. So a lot of different versions. Permanent supportive housing is one that is a long-term program. It's really designed for people who've been chronically homeless, have a disabling condition, reasons why they're probably going to need support for a long time and likely indefinitely. And again, usually we're helping find them a home in one of these Measure A units or a voucher subsidy where they can get to a place that they can afford with what income they have and have those services that are really important. Rapid rehousing is a similar type program, but it's more time limited, right? Not everybody's going to need support indefinitely. But if you're coming off the streets, this is designed for people who are currently homeless. You're going to have a lot of trauma. You're going to have a lot of time. You're going to need some needs to get yourself back together and be able to be more self-sufficient. So typically in the 1 to 3 year time frame, you get this assistance and support. And so that hopefully people are more ready to be able to go out there and stay stably housed and thrive on their own. And then third, which is really important because it's something that is an emerging type of strategy and something we at Destination Home have invested a lot in recent years, is homelessness prevention. There are all these rent pressures are pushing so many families to the brink. And so what we've seen is if you can have that kind of rental assistance up front, and again with those support services, and help provide that to a family that might be on the cusp, right before they're about to be evicted or be overwhelmed financially, you can help them stay stably housed. And as you see it on here, as you look at this slide, all these programs, the overwhelming majority of people remain housed, not only while they're in the program, but afterwards too. And just a really important evidence for how investing in these type of housing programs and strategies end homelessness. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that this is not, we shouldn't just rely on our own internal data, but there is a mountain of evidence that shows that these type of programs, also commonly referred to as housing first programs, there have been so many third-party academic research studies that show these type of results, that they work. And even though there's a lot of misinformation about there and a lot of critiques, because people are obviously frustrated with the level of homelessness and the enduring nature of the crisis, but if you look at these programs, there's overwhelming studies that show that they're effective in addressing homelessness. And I want to call out 2 in particular because it's kind of neat. Part of what we do in our communities, we want that third-party evaluation. We actually looked at and asked for independent studies of 2 of our programs. So in the next slide, you see UCSF the UCSF, people are familiar with that, their research arm did a study about one of our permanent supportive housing programs. And just like we saw from our own internal data, the vast majority of people remain housed. But what they looked at too is not just the 1 year, which is kind of like a common baseline standard for looking at retention, but they followed folks for several years afterwards. And the overwhelming percentage of people stayed housed for multiple years. Secondly, our prevention program, and particularly because it's newer, we definitely wanted this kind of independent evaluation. And what we saw, so we asked them to do a randomized control trial. Unfortunately, we don't have enough funding to serve everybody who comes to us, but it made for a great study. What happened to people who came to us and were able to get that assistance and those we weren't able to serve? And what we saw was that you were 81% less likely to become homelessness if you got this type of intervention. And so really important proof that it's not only benefiting the community, but we're actually preventing cases of homelessness there. So this is just a sampling of the type of research that is out there and helps make the case that not only is homelessness a housing problem, but housing does end homelessness. But besides talking about the data, and we'll have time to go more into this deeper, and we can point to the resources for your heart delight. But it's really important to remember that behind the data, or we're talking about real people as well, and that their experiences should inform this work just as much as any study. And some of the people we're joined today, we're proud to be joined today by several people who are affiliated with our Lived Experience Advisory Board and our Youth Advisory Board here in Santa Clara County, people who have previous experience of homelessness. And a few of them have graciously offered to kind of share their perspectives, and I want to share some space for them. So first, I believe I saw Nayeli Grano, who's here. Nayeli, are you here? If you are, do you want to come on screen so I can confirm? Yes, no, yes, I think she's there. If you're there, come on.
Hi, I'm here.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for coming. I'm just going to say thank you for joining. Nayeli Grano is a member of the Youth Advisory Board, and I would love it if you're interested in taking a minute to tell us a little about yourself and just how your own story and experiences relate to some of the things we've been talking about here today.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to share my story. I was in foster care. I grew up in foster care, and I aged out at the age of 25. I'm 26 now, so about a year and a half ago. And I was very thankful to get housing assistance, and the housing assistance that was provided to me for the last years that I was in foster care was a stipend. I would get a check, and I would use that for rent. I would get $950 to pay for my rent, and it helped a lot because I was also working and going to school at the time. So having part of my rent paid for was a truly blessing because it was helping me keep my housing stable, but also I was able to afford to work and go to school at the same time without having to worry too much about my expenses such as bills, because I did have to pay bills out of pocket, and my rent was about $1,200 at the time. So I was still having to put money out of my own pocket to afford a room that I was able to afford. And I recently graduated from UC Berkeley with a major in sociology. And I am now working for juvenile probation in Santa Clara County. So I was able to graduate, and I was able to get a good job, but I'm still not able to be able to afford housing. It's not because I'm on drugs or I have mental health problems or because I'm not working to do it. It's just because I graduated from the #1 sociology program in the nation. I'm working for one of the best counties in California, and yet I'm having to struggle finding, getting the means to afford my housing. My housing is, I have to pay for a room $14.75, almost $1,500, and I get paid $1,700 bi-weekly. So this month, and then I just moved, so I have to pay another $1,475. And I was lucky enough to find housing with an old landlord, and so they're giving me the ability to pay the down payment and payments because I can't afford almost $4,000 in just one payment, and it's only for a room. And so this Friday, when I get paid, I won't be left with anything. Everything will, everything will go to my rent and my deposit, and I only have $200 left to pay for my food, to pay for my bills, pay for gas, and it's hard, and I'm like, what am I doing wrong? I'm working, like I said, I already went to school. I'm still going to school. I'm trying to study to go to law school in 2025. I'm studying for the LSAT right now. So I'm still, I you would say that I'm better off than most people who have not graduated and who don't have a county job. But I'm like, wow, I'm already graduated. I graduated from one of the best universities. I work for one of the biggest counties, and I still can't afford to not live paycheck to paycheck. And even then, just living paycheck to paycheck, I'm still struggling to find, the means to be able to afford gas and stuff like that. Thankfully, I am in the youth advisory board with Destination Home, and we do get a stipend for $750 a month. And it's something that, of course, I don't rely on because it's a stipend, but it does help me with little expenses that I have. Like, for example, now that I'm going to be left with nothing, literally nothing from my paycheck, I'm my hope, like my little light at the end of the tunnel, is the stipend that I get from the youth advisory board. And but then, like, when am I going to get it? Recently, our stipends have been getting here late, and I have to wait until I get my stipend. And when am I going to get it? I don't know. I don't have an exact date for that. And so, and it just goes back to me not, it's just a stipend. It's not something that we get on a regular day, or it changes, it varies, and so it's kind of hard to also like rely on the stipend and my paycheck. And so I'm having to like find other ways to be able to find money, and that's actually what I'm working on. Like, I'm trying to see what else I can do to find money. And I think that one of the ways that our county can support young adults like myself who have been in foster care, and who are still who are working and are still wanting to pursue higher education, is with programs, with housing programs. And honestly, like, if we don't invest in programs as a community, we're just going to see more homelessness. And people like me who are working for the county, who have degrees, are going to be also in the verge of being homelessness, or homeless, because we just can't afford, like, my job doesn't pay me enough to be able to afford rent and still be able to afford gas and still be able to afford food. And it's just basic needs, and I can't afford them because I unfortunately live in a place where I don't get paid living wage. I get paid minimum, and the minimum doesn't allow me to afford a place to live in my own county. where I was in foster care, and I did my work, I did my due diligence to go to school and graduate, and I'm still not able to afford to live here. So what are my options?
Nayeli, thank you so much for sharing. And I wish we could keep going on too. I know we have. I want to make sure we have time for Rose, but I really appreciate you just sharing your perspective and being open with kind of the reality of what we're facing. And I think there were a lot of great points in there that I hope we'll all keep in mind as we think about this issue. So thank you. Rose, if you're still there, I definitely would love to give you a few minutes just to kind of share your perspective as well as we go in and just tell a little bit about your experiences and your challenges you face, your dreams, and how it relates to this issue of housing and homelessness.
Hi, my name is Rose Barajas, and I'm a LEAB member. And I joined LEAB in December of 2021. I'm a past entrepreneur and young mother who had no higher education. Navigating through poverty and a system I saw to be broken motivated me. I wanted to change and make a difference in the world. I owned and operated my own store at 17, started my dad's business, but a toxic relationship took me down. I lost my store, started drinking, getting DUIs, eventually couch surfing, losing my kids, doing time in prison were chapters of my life that I lived. Upon my release, I obtained employment at a law office. However, like in 2008, where they had that recession, I was the first person to be laid off. I was looking to apply at another place, but while crossing the street, I was hit by a car, and I had to learn how to walk all over again, recover from that. So right shortly after my dad had retired, closed the business that I had helped him start, and he moved to Colorado. Since I've been on and off the street, living in encampments, my car, an RV, and shelters. Now I'm housed. I share my story because I would like to bring hope to others like me. Maybe that hope could save a life, as 90% of my people out there that I call street family are dead. Finally, I share also to let you know I felt upset and on random apps like Nextdoor for when seeing conversations in the community about unhoused being addicts and mentally ill. So I invite you to be informed that in less than 24 hours, you could spiral down too and end up like me or, you know, someone that you know could, and how would you feel? Or they, perhaps if they were profiled like that as well. I'm, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. You said it very well. Thank you, Rose, as well. And back to Nayeli, both of you for sharing your story. I think these are, all things we need to keep in mind as we're doing this issue. I think, many of you came here for the data and we find that interesting, but it's these people's, all of our experiences and the common experience we have that helps motivate me. And I hope all of us will keep in mind as we think as we more come together to try to address this crisis. So you guys have been very patient, and thank you because we've heard a lot too, but that's the fun part where we're going to have an opportunity for all of you to engage in this conversation and ask questions. And I'm going to turn this over to Esme and Kathy to kind of take us to this next to last section of this workshop.
Thank you, David.
Oh,
Sorry. Just quickly, as we process information that we have heard, we want to go into small breakout groups to just kind of discuss what you're hearing, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. You will have a group facilitator with the questions to kind of help guide the conversation. Make sure everyone gets a chance to speak at your group, and I'll turn it over to you, Kathy.
thanks, Esmeralda. So please be patient with me. I've just assigned everyone into your groups. I'm giving everyone a few minutes, and then we'll all kind of skedaddle back to the main room, but see you all soon.
Welcome back. Thank you for working with us on this process. Just want to open it up, and we want to invite you to share, just based on what you heard on the small group conversations, overall thoughts and reflections from those conversations. And make sure you're sharing from your own perspective. And if your group came up with a few questions that you still have in mind, this is a time for you to share with us. So we may not have time to go through all of the different groups, but we would be happy to at least hear from a few of the groups that we had. So do we have any volunteers?
Go ahead. With our group, we were kind of discussing like how the ends aren't being met, how rent is like not enough, and I meant your wage is not enough to afford your rent, and how many people in our community, like, they're struggling. People with degrees, we hear people with degrees that are struggling. Imagine people that don't have degrees. And housing seems like it's almost become like a business because there's not enough housing for people, and the housing that there is super expensive, and there's a lot of people living in their cars and just really struggling out there. But yeah, that was kind of what we discussed.
Thank you, Kristen. Anyone else? You're welcome to just unmute yourself. Nayeli?
Yeah, I want to thank the person that shared their story in our group because it was really eye-opening for me. As you know, I did share that I do have a degree and I'm struggling, but in my please excuse my innocence or my lack of knowledge or my lack of awareness, but I thought at some point I thought, well, like the directors of our organizations, of our county organizations, are getting paid more than 100,000 a year. And to hear that, those people are still struggling to afford to pay rent with their families, it's just really eye-opening to, and like it makes me aware of how big the problem is. And if they're struggling like me, that I'm making, less than 50 grand a year, I'm struggling. So it's just really eye-opening to see how big of a problem this is, and not just for a certain group of people, but it's county-wide, and it's affecting the people that work for this county and people that are, working towards bettering our community. But how can we do that if we have our hands tied because of policy, and our needs are not being met with policy?
Thank you, Nayeli. Yeah, this issue affects us all in different ways. Thank you. We have time for one more person.
Particularly if there were any questions that folks had that we didn't get a chance to talk about what we've talked about today.
Jennifer, are you okay with the question that you asked us?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Is that all right if I, one of the thing we talked about in our small group that Jennifer brought up was the value of using, and this was particular to San Diego, of using Nextdoor to go more on the offense, right? Around, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, being more deliberate about responding, interacting with people that are talking about homelessness, or doing it in a disparaging way, which happens so much, right, on Nextdoor, and whether or not there might be value in organizing more of a ongoing push to provide education that way.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you both, Jens. And it's actually a great transition to what Chelsea's going to close us off with. But I think it is hard, right? And I think we're at this point where this is a topic of discussion in all our communities, which in a way is good, but not the most productive ways too. So I'm glad people brought it up. I think there's not one right answer to it, but one of the things we wanted to leave you here with is what we think is going to be important for solving this problem and how we hope you'll help. So Chelsea, please help bring us home.
Thanks, David. As you've heard, there's a tremendous work that's happening, and you have a way to plug into that. We all have a role and we all hold power in solving this challenge. One of the easiest things that you can do to help is what you're doing here today, learning. And helping to dispel some of the myths that are so rampant and that, you know, in its worst case can inform bad policy and bad decisions. So we have some tools that can help you learn, engage, and also advocate for the solutions that we're driving forward in our community, namely making sure that housing gets developed as quickly as possible, especially for our lowest income neighbors. If you want to go to the next slide, Kathy, please. We're just going to scan through a few of the resources that we have to help you. We have an Understanding Homelessness portal with a new myth-busting section. And Kathy, you can just kind of click through quickly through these slides here. As well as several resources on our website under the Housing Ready Communities Initiative. Kathy is also putting these links in the chat so you don't have to take down these URLs. But we have these informations available. We're also going to be sending an email out after this webinar that includes direct links to the explainer video that you saw today, as well as the resources that I'm referencing to help you dive deeper into this content and also share it with those that you know. We'd also love to come and speak to groups, speak to organizations that you're maybe affiliated with. So let's continue the conversation. And I know you have just a few minutes, or we're at time here, and so I want to make sure that we get to our book raffle that we have for you all. As David mentioned toward the top of our presentation, we are giving away a book that holds a lot of the tremendous new exciting data that we were going over today. Homelessness is a housing problem. So we are seeing the wheels spin now. Drum roll, please. Who will be our big winner? Gabriel, congratulations. So we'll follow up with you and make sure we get your information so that we can mail you the copy of the book. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Esmeralda, do you want to close us out?
Sure, just wanted to thank everyone for showing up today. Don't forget, Kathy's going to put a link to a survey on the chat. Please fill that out. It would help us do this in a better way when we're sharing time with you. Keep an eye out for the follow-up email that Chelsea talked about, and that will include the recording of today's workshop. So thank you so much for joining. And we were honored to spend time with you today.